Hello everyone, welcome again to the Webcampus Gradebook Essentials webinar. As we get started, I hope everybody understands that the potential for interactivity in this webinar. We're glad you signed up and you can see yourself in a participants list and you've gone through the audio setup wizard, but there's some things that you need to know that are available to you. In the left side of the Blackboard Collaborate window, there are several status icons, and if you roll your cursor over a number of them, you see that to the very left, like underneath where my photo is, where it says Sue Armitage, there are status icons, so you could click on a smiley face, and there you see a smiley face has been entered next to mine. So go ahead and try that out. Let us know that you can access that. All right, we see some approving smiley face, very nice. All right, next to it on the right is if you need to step away from the session, just so to let people know that you're not actively participating. And then again, further next to the right is a little hand. So if you have a question, you can click on that, just sort of get our attention, let us know that you would like to participate. And then the fourth one on the right is something I'd like everybody to use right now. It has a little check mark, and if you roll over, you see it's got a yes or a no. So please answer this question. Have you taught a course using Webcampus and the gradebook? So we're interested in you. So if you please go ahead and click yes or no, will give us a sense of who's all here. All right. Now what I'm going to do is publish all these responses, and so we can see that the yeses are about at 41%, the nos are at 33%, and we don't have answers from the others. So we have a nice mix of people, some with experience and some quite new. All right, so now I have cleared all of those. Now the next thing I'd like to bring to your attention and ask you to participate in is right below our participants list, and that's the chat box. Several people have found that, but it's just like IMing. So if everybody could just type something now into the chat box, you can say hello to someone or perhaps write a question that you're coming to the session with. So just take a moment now, find the chat box, find that text field, and go ahead and chat and type something in, and then hit enter. All right, well that's the area if you would like to ask a question during the proceedings. I will keep an eye on the chat box, and if there's a particularly good question, maybe we should address it right then, maybe it's something we should hold till later, but that's what it's for. So now that we have those activities under our belts, we know how to participate. Let's go on. All right, I'd like to introduce Rex Suba. Rex is our presenter. He is my colleague here at the UNLV Office of Online Education. He has quite a background as an instructional designer and a classroom teacher, both middle and high school in Norman, Oklahoma. And you can see from the introduction here, Rex is a self-proclaimed geek, and he always has the best tech tools. He always is very happy to talk about them as well. And I am your moderator, Sue Armitage. I'm an instructional designer here in the Office of Online Education. And I will now turn it over to Rex, who will go over the agenda and make his presentation. Thanks, Rex.
Thank you, Sue. Hopefully my voice is not too loud. If you do have some audio difficulties with my volume level, please type a note to Sue and she will keep me up to date on on where settings are. If you feel like we seem to be talking fairly deliberately and uncharacteristically slow, it's to make sure that words don't drop out. So we want to make sure that it doesn't sound like a skipping record as we are proceeding. If for some reason we do speed up and you find that you've missed something or need clarification on an item as we go over things, please also raise your hand and Sue will interject as we proceed. So with that said, we are covering a lot of ground, and so this will help us stay organized in terms of the presentation and its pacing. What I want you to be clear about as we go through there, even though the potential for showing an actual Webcampus course live through a feature in the Collaborate environment is offered, we are not able to guarantee that everybody will see the same thing on their screens, because we don't know if you're using the iPad for your experience today. We don't know if you're using a netbook, and so all of the screen captures that are provided are a stable, predictable way for us to get stuff to you during the course of the presentation. During the Q&A, we'll talk a bit about what the possibilities are, but Sue and I will clarify what other follow-ups can exist if you were not able to adequately get the information on the basics that we are addressing in this particular presentation. And that's why it's called Essentials. It's not going to combine all different levels. It's really aimed at being an overview for those that are relatively new to dealing with grading in this particular environment. I'm moving to the next slide. So the gradebook is the built-in tool for managing grades within Webcampus. Now, I know that an email was just sent at 9:10 this morning about the mid-semester grades, and they talk about my UNLV. What you're doing in my UNLV and Webcampus are not necessarily connected. So you may manage your grades in Webcampus, but then you'll have to manually input them into the web grading tool that is part of my UNLV. Grades or management can be done manually in the columns that are separately from, generated separately from a tool. So if you are using the assignments tool or you are using the assessments tool to do exams, quizzes, etc., or you're using a graded discussion, those tools will generate their own columns. However, if you have an arbitrarily created item for which you want to maintain some level of information, because it's not just grades that you can use the gradebook for, then you just have this kind of additional arbitrary column. One of the things that you're going to find during the presentation is that while the gradebook does have some features, it is fairly limited in what it can actually do. So if you are very comfortable with Excel, you may find that putting information into the system is all you're going to want from the gradebook, and then you're going to use Excel or some other spreadsheet, worksheet program to actually do your calculations. And you may understand more as we get to talking about the calculation usage of the gradebook. I'm moving on to the next slide. So this is an overview of the tool itself, and I understand if you're not able to see details. So what I try to do during the course of the presentation is first give you the big picture, and then we get a little more granular by providing you some close-ups as I'm able to provide them. I'm going on to the next slide. So now you see this is an augmented, larger view of the previous screen, but by the same token, we don't see all of the possibilities that were in the previous view. It's been cropped. So remember that you have three modes while you are able to access the Webcampus course that you are teaching. You have your build mode, which is the construction and, quote, maintenance, unquote, of your class. You have the student view, which allows you to, in most cases, preview what students are experiencing. And the one we're going to be spending the most time in during the presentation is the teach mode or tab. It has to be active in order for you to see the instructor tools submenu, which has a link to the gradebook. So the parts that we are going to be highlighting during the presentation are these items that you're seeing along the upper portion of the display of the gradebook. Create columns. You will click on this particular choice when you're creating non-activity spawned columns. So like I had mentioned, assessments, assignments, and discussions, those will generate theirs from those tools. We're not going to talk about that a whole lot because we have enough ground covered just with looking more in the gradebook and things that those result in. What are some things that you may wish to be using these manual columns or the create columns option? You might want to do attendance points or just take attendance. You may have extra credit you may generate, and because there's no activity per se, you may want to do that. You may have to create a selection column so that if you have a mix of juniors and seniors in your course, you may need to know who is who. Or if you have a cross-listed course that is both undergraduates and graduate students, you may want to have a column that lets you sort as well as select those who belong to different groups. So create column is where you do those manual or non-activity created columns. At the other end of the group of four, you have reorder columns. If we have time, we'll talk about how to use that. Bear in mind that as you add activities, let's say you've had a number of items that you've created and you say, I need to create a new quiz, but the quiz listing for the students when they see their grade needs to be more in line with some other sequence than just at the end of the list. You may use this choice to put it in a position that makes more sense for the students for displaying. The third item that I'm going to talk about will be gradebook options, because this is where a number of things happen that you may be adjusting during the course of your class. You will notice that in the particular display that some of the numbers have a caret in front of them. We will explain why those numbers have those symbols in front of them when we talk about changing grades. If everybody's still with me, if you can just click on your raised hand there, we'll know that everybody's up with us so far. Thank you so much. I'll lower that and go on to the next slide. So, under Create Column, these are the different types of columns that we can create when we use the manual input. So alphanumeric, our first choice, combination of letters or numerals, but cannot be used for later calculations. So you can put items that are there, but if you decide that you want to do like a weighted grade column or do a sum or total points, this column, even if you put numbers into it, cannot be used. Text, if we're talking about things that are phrases or other things that could be used there, those are okay, but you have to plan ahead. Use the numeric column, numeric type, the fourth choice of the 7, if you plan on using the entry for numbers that will also be used for later calculation. The calculated column is not really a standalone column. It's based on information that you glean from other columns that have calculable or adding or subtracting, multiplying type of data. Letter grade can be used, again, like the calculate column, not by itself, but in reference to something that you may have. So if you have a customized scale and you want to present the students with a letter grade rather than have them have to manually create their interpretation of their grade, you can provide that. The selection list, this is where I was talking about junior or senior, where we were talking about undergraduate or graduate students. You can create a preset grouping or menu of choices, and then rather than have to type it over and over again for each student, you can pick from your list, like you do on a lot of enrollment websites. Moving on to the next slide. So just as a point of reference for the grades that you're not doing from a manual standpoint, this is what happens when you are dealing with grades like in a discussion. So on the left side you see an overview of a view. We're still in Teach, but we're going to quote grade a gradable discussion topic, which is what you call an individual entry in the discussions tool in Webcampus. So using the action link, that's with the caret and the 3 lines, our next to last choice is grade topic, and you can see it enlarged in the red box to the right. Going on to the next slide. When you select that choice, you will see this resulting screen. And as we were looking at earlier, we had a course that was created for training that Sue Armitage and I use with the graduate students in nursing. And so these are not real students. These are just virtual students, but the benefit of having them available is that we can have their virtualized input for grading. So after we selected grade topic, we see this view. So on the left side you see where we can enter grades, but on the right side you see a number of bits of information that can be useful for grading. And I will draw a square around what I'm talking about. Perhaps I will draw a square. Okay. So some faculty not only grade on the posting of messages and responses, but also those that are being read. And so the Webcampus tools can trigger the existence of a student in this left panel where you have the grading when the students start to do gradable activities. So you would enter your grades at this point and save them. Well, how would you know what you would be providing a grade on for like a discussion? So I'm going to the next slide. So I've clicked on a choice beside one of the students. Our students' names are guest 33, guest 34, and guest 35. And when I clicked on guest 33, we brought up this sample posting. Now, this is lorem ipsum text, so if you're familiar with that from publishing, it's just Latin text from an actual document, but it's used so that people won't think that it's real text to really pay attention to in terms of actual words. So you can see that there's a way to be able to view the content without going back and forth between gradebook columns and the students' entries. And so when you're using the discussion topic in Webcampus, this is a way for you to have a very efficient way of connecting the students' output with their resulting grades. So I've entered all of the grades for the students. I've virtually graded the virtual students. And before I proceed, I click Save. Note that you do not have to do all your grading in one session. If you want to grade 3 people in one session and come back later, that's fine. You just note that anything you commit to will only be placed in the box when you push Save. on the next slide will show what the resulting output in the gradebook view will be. So we did not enter these grades in the gradebook, but they were generated from the tool, and it gave us a natural progression from student work to this. We didn't have to flip screens back and forth. This would be different from what you do for manual grading. When you select a line with the two dots above it to enter a manual grade, you will see this kind of box. Current value, of course, for something where there was not an existing grade will be null or 0, and then you change it. There are some pieces here that probably you don't typically talk about, but the reason they're probably useful is that if you are a graduate teaching assistant that is supervised by an involved instructor, you may need to explain why a grade has been changed rather than just the initial one. And so this is where you're able to make comments, and this audit history would be able to show if there was having to be updated grades on a regular basis or whatnot. You'd be able to track that information. So we're moving to the next section of the presentation. We had just finished contrasting manual grade input versus a tool-based one. So what can this tool do? As we had mentioned earlier, it cannot place final grades directly in the MyUNLV web grading service at the conclusion of a term or session, or even for the midterm grading. It cannot fully function as a replacement for Excel. It uses Excel type of notation, and particularly for the issue of students who receive services from the this DRC, the Disabilities Resource Center, we can't have some grades display and others not in terms of one activity. So you have to know what you want to, quote, expose the group to versus what's not. Another term for this that's used in Webcampus is releasing. So if there's a column that's released to students, they will see that grade, they will see that column, they will see that information in My Grades. So if you have a DRC student who has a customized exam, if you release that grade column, everybody will see it. So this is why I point out you cannot allow for differentiated grade display. Either something is shown or it is not shown. It can't be, you can't pick and choose the parties within the activity that will be able to access it or not. What can Webcampus do? It is a place for, if you're able to use the strengths that it happens to have one place where the students can be provided an accumulation of displayable scores. So while it may not necessarily be the perfect tool, it is a usable tool, and if you keep things kind of compartmentalized and in stages, it becomes manageable. And perhaps that will be more clear when we do the calculation tools toward the end of the presentation. Finally, one more point on what it can do. It is always accessible. So rather than having to keep track of a grade book, you have this record that's there. You're traveling while you're teaching and you are in Poughkeepsie and you need to do grades. Your grade book is there, literally and figuratively, and you don't have to carry it around. As long as you can get access to the internet and the browser you're on will work with Java adequately to do certain things, you're good to go. So again, about the hiding and releasing of columns, this is about making sure that you are in control of what is revealed. Some instructors do activities like a contract grade. In other words, there's an assessment that will trigger other things to happen, but there's actually no points that the students will get in their final grade. And so the column that is generated by this may not be something that they want to unleash to the students, so you will select this choice. It is not the default choice for most items, so you have to specifically select it. Bear this in mind when you're having to create custom or DRC versions of activities. There are more items that are related to the creation of those, including selective release, so we're really not addressing that in this particular presentation. Okay. This is the view of what has been released to students. So this is the My Grades tool. You'll note that we've now switched to the student view mode, and so each course that uses Webcampus has a demo student, and this particular demo student is not one of the three that we were talking about. This is the one that is assigned to your course. So this particular set of items are those that had been released. So you see that JUR Mod 2, 3, 4, and 5 are available, but JUR Mod 1 is not released. It's still a valid column, but because I had made a choice earlier to not release it, you don't see it. So it has to be selected as one of the choices for releasing before it'll show up in this view. Going back to the teach mode on the next slide, additional adjustments to what is displayed can be taking place by using the gradebook options, and in the red box you see the resulting menu that will pop up when you click on the action link for that. After you've selected the choice there, this is what your choices will be. Since we're focused on the releasing of the column, JUR Mod 1 was not visible. So as you can see in the enlarged version in the box, JUR Mod 1 has no beside it. And so by clicking on the no, I can toggle that to where it, on this slide, shows that it says yes. And when we go to the next view, now this particular student, back to our virtual students, now sees that JUR Mod 1 is at the top of the list. It is now a visible score. So if you don't release something, it's not visible in My Grades. You release it, it's available in My Grades. The next slide will be reiterating something when we talked about manually entering a grade. So you're just still changing a grade using the columns rather than the activities. So this is the view that you would have when you're changing an existing grade. This brings up, why were the carets in front of those numbers at the beginning of the presentation? Anytime you enter a grade from that view, it will have this caret in front of it to differentiate it from one that was entered via an assignments grade, an assessments grade, or a discussions tool grade. Again, the caret precedes these numbers that are entered in this location. I'm going to skip the reorder columns at this point because I'm concerned about not having adequate time for Q&A. So if you are interested, and we do have time, we can certainly cover that. So I'm skipping the next slide, and we're going to go deal with probably the biggest chunk of the presentation, which is the calculated column. Again, you start with creating a column that will be using information that exists elsewhere in the gradebook. So you select calculated column from one of the 7 choices. After you've created the column, this one is called Papers Comp, short for Papers Composite Grade. You're going to select the action link that is next to the resulting column. Again, the columns appear at the end of the display, you'd use the reorder columns option that we skipped over to put it into a more logical location if at the end is not where it belongs. And you're going to select Edit Column Formula. Now, just an additional reminder, you'll be sent an automated link with our recording that is proceeding right now, so if some things you want to come back to and review step by step, you'll be able to access that recording and play it over as you need to. This is the editing box for the papers comp column that I created. So you'll see a number of features that use terminology and abbreviations that look very similar to Excel. Pretty much the similarity ends there because one of the deficits of this particular way of doing things in Webcampus is that you can't easily edit in the middle of a formula you create. So how do you edit a formula? We'll say that because this is just an accumulation of points, we're going to do a sum of them. So like in Excel, you use the sum formula. You start with clicking on the button that says sum, and it gives you a left brace. And then you click through the items that are available to be used for your calculation. Only columns that have valid information for a calculation will show up in this menu. So if you forgot and you created a column that used alphanumeric, it will not show up as a choice because it will only look for those that can be used in the calculation. So when we start off our list, because within the sum option we are going to be adding values, we're going to scroll to where we have our first of two papers. But because we are using an Excel type of setup, while you could say plus, it seems, especially for a list, it'd be repetitive to do this plus this plus this. So the more efficient way is to accumulate your items, and the system will separate them with a comma. So we'll be clicking on the choice to add the second paper. We're going to select Enter Another Value. After we selected Enter Another Value, we would select paper 2, and so that's the comma there, and here's paper 2. When I have completed this section or the entire formula, then I select End Function. Now what is not shown in this particular view is Save. To exit this and put it in play, make it active in the course, doing its calculation, you would scroll further down this area to save, and then the resulting calculation might look like this after it's done its work. So before, it just said NA, NA, NA because there was nothing available. And so for our three characters, 33, 34, and 35, you now have these points that were assigned based on the papers comp column. If everybody's still with me so far, please raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you. So that's the basic setup for the formula. When I do something like a total points, I'll want the students to have an idea of what they are up against when they look at the column. And so here is where you can make these adjustments and say that when you have the resulting column, this will be what it's worth. So this is different kind of calculation that is more comprehensive than just the 2 papers. So I have a final grade. So you heard me mention stages. Because you're not able to edit in the middle, one of the things I do with instructors and graduate teaching assistants who want to try to get Webcampus to do most of the work for them is we do things in stages. Remember that we don't have to release a column just because it exists. So in this choice here where it says release to students, that's your call. I would recommend that unless you want them to have them in stages, don't release them. It can still be a grade-related column as this earlier choice indicates, but don't have it released unless you're sure that that's what you want to have students view. This grade book column, the calculate column, would look like this. And as with the previous example, it is merely a sum. So it just accumulates all the possible points in our imaginary course. And this would be what it looks like at the display end. So what was previously not available, you now have these points there. So not everybody got a perfect score close to it, but you see that it's able to figure out those points. Because I like to work in stages so I don't have to undo an entire collection, I have my next stage is doing the average. So of course, on a scale of 0 to 100, its maximum value would be 100. I have it refer to the previous calculation. So calculations can incorporate other calculations. Here, I do a simple division and then multiplication. So the first term is in parentheses. It's the number of points it accumulated with my previous formula divided by the maximum number of points, which was 275. And then I multiply that term by 100 to give me what their quote average would be. And you see that displayed on this screen here. So instead of having something that, oops, I have to change the average and now I have to go to change an item in the middle of a huge single stage calculation, I have something that does all my possible points and then I refer to that. One of the places where that can be helpful is that if you change activities but you ultimately have the same final amount, you're not boxed in and having to redo your entire calculation. You can do that in stages. Why I'm talking about this in particular is because if you wanted to do weighted grading, this is the way you could manage it with the gradebook. If you're going to be using Excel or not using weighted grading, please bear with us. Those of us that are going to be using this, this will be probably one way to consider what the possibilities are using the built-in tool in Webcampus. Again, your traveling gradebook. So we're starting with these calculations I demonstrated. You're going to have the average. You're going to multiply the percentage value of the category, and then you do your entire grade for the final grade. And so we're going to click through showing the stages as they would be looking in the grade book. So this is how this particular faculty member is dividing up the value of all the stuff in the class. And in this particular example, we are focused on this particular, oops, let's try that again. In this particular category. So there are 50 points possible, but the weight of the category in the final grade is 35%. So this is how this particular item would line out if we were doing this this way. I stop at this point on the weighted grading because I just want to demonstrate how you fit that into the calculation. So as you were finishing up the weighted grading, you could do in this one chunk all of the different weights that you had that were shown on the previous slide and have them calculated out for that. So while it is not Excel per se, there are enough strengths, if you are aware of its quirks, that you can do a lot of really advanced stuff using the gradebook tool in Webcampus. One thing that I like to share with instructors is being succinct on file names or column names as you are creating items for the gradebook. You'll see that as things are displayed, they can be truncated in one view, and sometimes the students are not clear if the names aren't exactly matching. So I'd recommend that you keep them fairly brief if possible. Here, when you display the column, you see even less than you had on the previous view. And if you have a lot of activities that start with the same 5 words, the students won't know the difference between the views, even though you will. So the less you can work with, but still be able to differentiate the activities for the students in their gradebook view as well as for yourself, I think the easier it will be to move in and out of the areas shown by the gradebook. Letter grade column real quick. You would start, for instance, with the average column that we calculated. And then you set up the scale. So based on the letter grade that you had for the column, and I'll enclose that, you're applying the numbers that they're calculating to the scale. So as you can see, A+ is 100 or above, 90 or higher is an A, and so on. And then when they see the resulting gradebook column, they would know what their letter grade is without having to calculate from a separate number. The selection list, you would create the list, and then as you're working through a list and you want to define who's a junior and who's a senior, you just do the drop down and then you save the setting so that you will be able to know what that choice will be in your gradebook. Again, not all of these items have to be displayed by to the students. If this is just for your internal record keeping, you don't have to release that column to the students. And here we are at the Q&A. I'll let Sue step in to talk about how we can address that. If you do need to leave us soon, please wait for her to talk about the correct way to leave the session, and we'll open up for questions in just a bit.
Rex, thank you very much. That was terrific. There's so much to the gradebook, and I think all my instructional design colleagues would say to instructors throughout the campus, if you have questions, please contact us. Here in the Office of Online Education, we have lots of people who can help you individually fine-tune your gradebook so it meets your requirements. So questions, if you have any, please go ahead and use the chat box to ask them. I will admit, I think I'm at a loss. I don't think I have my Blackboard Collaborate set up because I can't read anybody's text besides my own. So if Rex can help read any comments, or if there's anybody else who can use the talk button, I would really appreciate your help because I can't figure out why I can't read other people's comments.
You can either type in the chat for the room if you have a question, or if you raise your hand, we'll try to take your questions in order. We'd like to be able to hear from you, so if you raise your hand and your microphone is working, we'd like to have you ask it live. So whichever way you would like to proceed, just go ahead and let us know what clarifications or questions we can address for you. For our people that are brand new to the gradebook, do you have any particular concerns that were actually addressed by what we presented today? let us know if we were able to, without necessarily going into any detail beyond the presentation, were we able to answer your question that you came to the session with. Okay, so we have at least one yes. That's great. Anybody else? Okay, two. Okay, Alice is raising her hand. Alice, did you want to pipe in? Did you want to make a comment or ask a question? For those of you that are not currently working with an instructional designer in the Office of Online Education because your course is offered as a face-to-face course or an in-person course with Web Supplement, the Faculty Collaboratory is a new service that is officially launching in the next week or so, and it meets for a couple of hours each day between Monday and Friday. And in the lead library, room 1225. If you want more information, I'm typing in the URL for that, so you can get more information about what the Faculty Collaboratory does. So if you want hands-on assistance and you don't have your own instructional designer with whom to visit, there are people that will be there at different times on the different days to provide you hands-on service. Always remember, there's also the help desk. One of the locations for the Webcampus help desk is on the second floor of the Student Union. Well, thank you very much for your participation and attendance today. Sue is showing our link to the evaluation. Sue, if you can type that into the chat box, there it is. That way you can go directly to it. We'd appreciate that. On the next slide, it shows how to leave the event. Under your help menu, you have leave session. If people leave the session this way, as soon as everybody is out of the session, the system will generate the recording and you will get your automated email that will provide you with the recording to this session. We expect also to have a supplemental web-based recording of this available at a later time. So thank you again for your assistance, Sue. Thank you, all of you, for your attendance. If you have some questions, please let us know if we can direct you to your assigned instructional designer, or please visit one of the people that are available in the Faculty Collaboratory. I myself will be in the Collaboratory as part of the rotating staff on Friday between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. So if you want me to do a follow-up and you happen to be on campus and available on Friday morning, visit me in the lead library in room 1225. It's all the way in the back when you go in the main doors off the mall, and it's behind the media resources desk in the library.